Seeking the truth never gets old, even when it hides in the shadows. Immerse yourself in the world of June's Journey, a free-to-play hidden object game set in the roaring 20s. Solve the mystery of the devious gossip spreader and celebrate our 7th anniversary with exclusive events, never-before-seen decorations, thrilling mysteries, and exciting giveaways. The adventure and the gossip awaits. Are you ready for the journey? Download June's Journey today for free on Android or iOS.
Okay, so we're back with Ken and Mike for My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz, and we have a special guest today, Amro Shihadah. And Amro, we're really happy to have you on. We've been talking about you for a couple episodes. Ken and Mike have always brought you up, and you participated in the Josh Gates documentary for Discovery when they did it a while back. And so why don't you just tell our audience and our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you kind of got roped into this Alcatraz thing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and thank you for the kind words. No, it's been a pleasure and an adventure. It's been a lot of fun. I had no idea it would turn into this, but it's something where it comes from a place of passion. So my name's Amro Shihadah. So I guess a little bit about me is I started my career and always around emerging technologies and kind of frontier technologies in AI and machine learning and cloud, things of that nature, and just always was fascinated about that and just always applied sciences. So I like to stay away from the word AI as well. So I actually, studied in finance, did sell side mergers and acquisitions for a while, and wrote a patent in applied AI for video content recognition, sort of like Google Lens, but applied that for media analysis, working with the DoD and intelligence community, and then more so transitioned into more media. So just being able to take massive amounts of unstructured data and add a lot of basically vector-based math. So looking at different features about it and kind of allowing you to bring a method to the madness of just big data. And that's what led me into founding IdentTV and wrote the patent in 2012, founded the company in 2013, went out to San Francisco, spent about 7.5 years there, opened offices in DC, Dublin, and Nepal. And we have a sister company called AppTech that does a lot of speech recognition, translation tech as well. And so I've been in the space since before, you could just spin up one of these algorithms and one of these neural networks to kind of do the work for you on AWS or GCP or Google Cloud. And so, really have, and when I say before, I mean, literally drag and drop labeling images for years of my life, probably. And so, really what I learned in that is how, it's really, it's a lot of, there's a lot of art to the science, but it is hardcore science. And so when we got presented with this, it was actually through, I believe, Oracle. It was an entrepreneur in residence there. They had just kind of dismissed the cloud, and then 2 years later, they're spending $4 billion to catch up, which was awesome to see. But having a super heavy, computational workload with all the computer vision algorithm, or basically classifiers that we would run at the same time, it was very attractive to them to kind of test their new systems. And so we got connected to, I believe it, I don't know if the publication exists anymore. I think it's Rothschild. It's a media outlet in Ireland. And they wanted to do a piece using computer vision. And it was on, I believe the first one they proposed was on if one of the Rockefeller's son that went to like a island survived or something. But then the photos emerged, for the breezy photos emerged, and they asked us if we'd be interested in kind of trying to solve this problem and bringing kind of an unbiased, objective approach. And I think my whole team, they're coming from academia, PhDs, they're very, very touchy about reputation and, being public in publications and whatnot. I was like, we're doing it. we're definitely doing it. And so that's really when I I listen. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, so looking at the facts, it was just like, all right, well, I lived a long time in the Bay, so when Josh and Mike invited me to come out to San Francisco, I was like, I'm gonna, stay here because it's COVID and just had our first baby, and second, that water sounds cold and that sounds like a really, really rough experience. But prior to that, we didn't really have an agenda in doing it, but we were working with the studio that helped us create the data we needed. So initially, and I can go into that process more in depth, but we had some raw data, some from the federal government, some from the family, and we needed some data in between to kind of help us, do checks in between, ages in their 20s to, later in life. And so we were able to collaborate and do some really cool stuff on that side. And then we actually had to go out and get a ton of, it's really hard to find digitized images specifically from a region. Thankfully, it was Brazil. So Brazil is a massive country. We actually had to go and get a whole set of sample data of 8 men in that age range that were actually in the country at the time, both classified as citizens and not, and actually run the analysis against real data. And so the results we got back were, I think, surprising to all of us.
Let me stop you real quick because I just want to, make sure our listeners are kind of understanding of it. So basically, what you did was, you actually got all the pictures you could get from that were existing of Clarence and John, that you could, throughout all the ages, and then you went down to Brazil to get a sampling of what people's in that region's faces would look like.
Yep.
Is that correct?
So what we had to do first was match that the actual original photos, the mugshots, were in fact the brothers and then the third participant as well. So we actually just looked at publicly available data from the federal government that made that very easy. So that's one checkpoint that we had to do. The second was actually taking those photos and aging them, and then running a check on the breezy photos to see if we, the computer generated aged imaging, which is actually way better than people realize, would match with the same features. So basically, the way facial recognition works is you take a bunch of samples, and you don't need as many as people realize, but you look at, the prominent features on a face. So like the brow, the eyes, the distance between the eyes, the mouth, the ears, things that stand out. And you get these things called vectors. And the vectors are just features that are extracted and grouped together so you can search against them super fast. And that's how you are able to run, what's called like a neural network. And so that takes the place of somebody, or augments somebody who is, forensic, facial recognition expert who might do this by hand. We're able to do it in, a matter of minutes. But we didn't actually have to go to Brazil. We just went and accessed databases that had about 10,000 male faces from that age range with the same kind of angles. And we then trained a model to say, okay, this is this grouping of faces. This is the Brazil data set. And so we'd run and we extracted all of those features from everybody in there and didn't assign any IDs or names or anything like that, just IDs. Just to think of a literal random number of string for each individual in there. And then we took the age photos, the ones that were digitized and aged from the mugshots and other family photos. And then we took the photos from Brazil. And when we compared them to the Brazil data set, so of just, males in that range, we actually were able to match that. In fact, the age photos matched the breezy photos. And then we're able to actually come up with 97.4% certainty that I believe it was Clarence that matched with a few people in there, but with one individual with high 90s, almost in the 98, 99% percentile, which is just, that kind of match is kind of unheard of. But specifically when we're looking at such niche data in a specific time frame and from a specific region, it really, really became like a take-home science exam, like a take-home experiment into like, whoa, okay, this might have had a bigger impact and knock-on effect than we realized. And so that actually won. We made it into a short, and that actually won 3 Clio awards, which again, the value of them is kind of lost on me. I'm not a big award guy. Really like to live by high impact, low ego, but those they give for commercials, for short films and documentaries, things of that nature. And we actually won like bronze in one category, silver and gold in another for the short, the long shot that we did on the series. And I think Mike was with us along the way the whole time. And from there, it kind of snowballed, and it really all basically from his hard work. And it's just been an amazing, humbling part to have played a part in that journey. And then, I mean, you guys saw the episode with Josh. I mean, he I think all but me refusing to say that I can give anything 100% certainty. I think we're pretty sure what happened, but it's unbelievable, and it's kind of I don't want to touch on anything emotionally triggering, but I think it's kind of BS that the government won't look at this because it'll be a blemish and something they claim they got right with Alcatraz. But I think looking back, we can see that that's not necessarily the case at all.
Yeah, I think if the situation was reversed and it was something that they used to identify something to basically bona fide their work and verify what they did in an investigation, they probably would look at it differently.
What's funny is it's the same technology that they've used. That's the really ironic part about. I don't know if that's irony or just funny, but it's actually technology that they've used, that they've verified as valuable, and it's no different than the accuracy and tests that we've done for looking for working with the rewards for justice with the DOJ, looking for bad actors and terrorists essentially.
That's crazy.
It's so fascinating what you do. So my questions might be elementary, but I'm just trying to make sure my audience understands exactly how you did this. So you took the photo from Ken and Mike that we've been showing of Clarence and John, and then that photo, and then you just kind of, can you just walk me through that process just a little bit?
Started with the mug shots. So if you take the mug shots and you think of those, if you picture those, we started with those. And the reason we started with those is because there's a lot more data to just say, all right, now we have, you got to think about sample size. So if you have one image, so the reason we use video is because within every second of video, you have at least 30 frames per second. So it's 30 images you have that you can use and manipulate and, run tests on. So in this case, we had one image that we had to really get a result from. So instead of trying to start from there, we started from where we would have a lot of data. So that's where we have, these human beings grew up, right? They had a life, even if it wasn't the digital age, there was still family photos.
Mm-hmm.
We could use those family photos to essentially, number one, confirm that the family photos and the mugshots are the same people, just so we have that scientific process checkmarked. And then from there, we worked with basically a forensic facial recognition, and like this person's half artist, half scientist, and they did like a digital aging of the mugshots to actually take it to the same age range as the Fred Breezy photos. So if you imagine that process is taking, the young Anglins and aging them into this, and then from those, so now we have a data set that has a bunch of data associated with it. Even if it has some, artistic elements to it, it's not really. I mean, it's pretty easy to age humans, right? And then the other side is we have an actual, in the what we call in the wild photo, which would be the Breezy photo. Mm-hmm. And so what we need to do to validate either one of those is test it against a sample data set. Is to say, all right, this is a relevant sample of 10,000 men in the region at this time, and now let's compare both photos, so the aged, the digitized age version and the in the wild photo. And so we basically would, run the facial recognition software and make sure everyone in that 10,000 person data set was trained. So we'd extract all those features from those people, and that would equal ID 0001, and then 0002 would be the next person. So we wouldn't assign names. We didn't even see them really. So we'd have them labeled by people that would just, they drag a box over a face, if you imagine. That's literally as complicated as it gets. And then the the neural network actually looks and extracts the features. So there's no room for manipulation here. So we trained that data set. So think of that as its own standalone facial recognition model. And then we introduced and said, hey, can you compare this against these images here? And so these are the digitized images. When we did that, it said, basically, yes, there's a match. There's a high percentage match for the age photos. The second thing we did, and I forgot this step, this is actually a very important step, is we compared the actual digitized, the age photos against the breezy photo, and that gave a match. It just was over 99.4%. And
wait, that's important. So the age photo, the age photo of John and Clarence gave you
that step. Sorry, it's been a while. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So the age photo of John and Clarence gave you a 98%, 99.4% match to the Fred Breezy photo.
Yes, and so what you have to consider though is there's certain things that are tough. So when you have side angles and not a frontal image, so if you notice your passport or your ID, they actually not only take you front on, they actually flatten your face. And that's why people think they look fat in pictures, but it's actually to be able to get the most features extracted. And so, it's almost like we had a cheat sheet on what biases to not introduce. And so what we were able to do is just make sure that whatever was being, altered in any way was being done so in the fairness of the same shot that the breezy photos gave. And that gave the match. So that was the first kind of tick mark into kind of validating the family's claims and Mike's kind of pretty steadfast and strong narrative. And then the second one was then taking both sets of the photo in the wild and then the digitized version and comparing them against actual human males in Brazil. And so that's where we got the 97% match on Clarence. We didn't get a match on John. I think his face was too angled this way. So Clarence, on the other hand, was actually, I think Clarence was the blonde hair, I think, right?
No, that's John.
So we got a match on John, whose face was more frontal, from the Brazilian facial recognition model that we trained.
Yeah. How did you account for, because they both have, because of the facial hair, the grown out hair? Obviously, is it how do you kind of account for that?
So you'd be shocked. So the features you actually look at, they don't really involve hair. It's looking at kind of the basically where you don't have hair is actually where you look. You look, at the upper brow. You look at the actual brow depth. You look at the actual, you look at the depth of the eyes, you look at the distance between the eyes, and you look at the eye shape, you look at the nose, you look at the mouth, you look at the ears. And there was this big issue with ethical AI because most media, just by way of life, was skewed towards, lighter skinned people. So there was actually a huge issue in terms of like trying to identify my face is actually more difficult because there's less data to train a model to do so, because I'm darker, so my features don't stand out as much, but we're still looking at the same features. So that's why your scan from when you use your Apple, or whatever device you use for your biometric authentication, if you're using facial recognition, it doesn't matter if you have a beard or sunglasses would matter, but
they're both wearing sunglasses.
Yep. So I can keep my hat on, and I can keep, I could go through Customs and Border Patrol with my hat on and glasses on, and Mr. B, one of the whatever the detective noses are, and more likely than not, the amount of features and vectors that you can extract from everywhere else, it's not going to really make that much of a difference. So
that's interesting.
Kind of factoring in that, because we're not looking specifically at the eyes. We're not looking specifically at one thing. If you want to think about it in a more simple way, if you think about what an image is or video is or anything, it's just a bunch of pixels, right? It's a ton of pixels. Each pixel is, guess what? A color. It's red, green, blue. It's we're talking about you can distill this down to very simple terms. And then red equals, this. And once you put it through the mathematical equation, It says, let's group all things that fit this pattern together, and let's group all things that fit this pattern together. And that's how you search across all the features across a data set that big. So it's actually taking these things and distilling them down as simply as possible to then look and be able to give a kind of consolidated result of what the actual analysis of the full image is.
I have a question. When you did the in the wild sampling, why did you have to do that? Like for the Brazilian database?
For a baseline?
I'm just curious how that works.
So it's like ground truth data is what we call it. So ground truth data helps you prove a hypothesis. So without that, we could have everyone would argue that you digitally aged it to make it look like, make it look like them. And that was like the first thing we considered. Is like, this is great. These are amazing renditions. They're amazing. It's amazing technology that you guys have. It's like very cool. But the first question people are going to ask or say is that this is fake. This is when deep fakes were at their like full-time hype as well. So, we're like, all right, let's just go do what we do and get data. And so we went and we scraped a whole bunch of data sources. There's no, you can't have a Freedom of Information Act for faces in Brazil or whatnot. But we actually found a data set that had a bunch of faces from that time period, and we just kept on adding to it. And that's how we built that ground truth data set, so we could compare not only the aged images to the actual in the wild photo, but have something that says, okay, this isn't just nonsense pseudoscience. This actually is the same way you would do it to establish any type of match or any type of result.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes, sir.
For the 10,000 photos that you're using to randomize the samples, and you obviously put the Fred Breezy photo in the mix of it, and to see what the computer would do to pick it. Were there any high level matches for the other 10,000 photos, or were they low percentage hits?
So there were like 4 that were high. I mean, depends if we're how do we do, so there's a lot of highs and a lot of lows. So if we're talking about like in the above 90% or more, there were 4 total. But we didn't just introduce one. We didn't just like take the Breezy photo and pop it in there, right? So we actually took that and pre-processed it. So we actually took that photo, then basically took out all the noise, and then took the images. And this is what we do for all the models. And you actually introduce distortion, or you introduce something called neural upscaling. And neural upscaling is exactly what the word means. It's like, think about how your eyes work. So if you squint and you can see better, that's the equivalent of neural upscaling. Like, it might actually make it blurry for someone else, but for you, it makes you see it clearly. So we took the faces and extracted them from the in the wild photo, and then we added distortion, different shadows, different, we would have the neural network kind of assume, if the face was at an angle. So it was actually looking at multiple iterations from those photos, but nonetheless, it's taking it from a photo that I believe was in the 80s, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken.
That was actually taken in the early 70s, maybe. We're not sure, anywhere between 1970 and 75.
So we're still talking about data from then, though. So we're taking data from then and we're comparing it against data from then. So that was the important part about that aspect. And so having 4 come up with 90% or more, and then having 1, obviously out of privacy, it's just like, and also I don't think people care to see who it matched against. I could probably find it somewhere, but the goal was to not only show the match of the latest and greatest tech, what it could do to simulate that, but also have something that people could understand wasn't just randomly done.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you were going to, so obviously they went to Brazil. I mean, that's what we've always been told. That's what and we can prove it now with the photo that we have, because that photo was taken in Brazil. So if you were going today, go back and look at, if they were living there and they undoubtedly had other photos taken of them, government type photos, if they ever applied for a passport, or if they went and got a driver's license or whatever else, there are probably other photos of them out there. Is it possible to, if you're able to grab those photos or found some of those photos, to compare it against any of the, say, the photo that you have now with Breezy?
Absolutely. I mean, it would be very little effort. And then the other thing that we could do is, now that we actually know, after the Expedition Unknown thing, like, you gotta remember, we were kind of entering this with like very little context. It was just kind of the facial recognition side, but we could do basically, we can do point of interest analysis. So like, you know, you can look at the river, the way that someone was manually looking at this, if this is the same river, the same backdrop, we could look at it. We could probably go out there and take a video of that region and give some sort of concrete analysis as to if it's the same backdrop. Because,
well, you know, interesting thing that we discovered when we were, because I always thought that was a river that was behind them, but we've actually found out that it was a road. It was a highway, that one of the main highways in between Rio de Janeiro and that was being built during that time frame. And so they're actually standing on their property, and that is a highway that's being constructed.
And then
so
there's a big Chevy plant like nearby.
Yes.
Now. Yeah,
yes.
I remember that. So, but still, so the other things, I think that's actually what ended up happening was, I do think it was a law enforcement based photo, because the one that did match was basically was a gentleman the same age, same features, just clearly I mean, it seemed like a disguise, at least. I mean, it was, I'll try to find it somewhere, but
it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, no, it would be. But if there were to be, you know, if there was some level of cooperation, of course, yeah, I'm sure that we could do more in-depth analysis. And then on top of that, I think what's more interesting, what I like to ask Ken is, like, you know, the stuff that was actually found in Brazil, to me, is more, and like the stuff that was found there is more indicative of, you know, triangulating the actual fact, which, wasn't there a coin found from the marina?
Yeah,
you roll it out, you can't really
Right.
fix that. That's like how you fingerprint, or it's the same features extracted there. That's about as concrete as of an example of, unless someone else randomly went from the San Francisco Bay Area to the bush in Brazil at the same time. You know, it kind of helps add that credibility. So, you know, so I'm not trying to make light of a serious situation, but it's, to me.
Oh no, you can make light of it. We've been making light of it for a while now.
Yeah.
We think it's ridiculous.
Ken have been hiding that coin for like 30 years and then tossed it in the ground, and Josh decided to lose all his integrity that he's gained over like 20 years and kind of just, you know, just kind of randomly find something. You know, I don't think that was even it. I think there was a lighter, there was some U.S. currency, like actual currency from the exact time.
Right.
It was, that's the stuff that actually, you know, resonates with me more so than everything else. It's just, I feel like the facial recognition, that analysis just kind of kicked off the fact that they were dragged out. That makes sense. The fact that I think they'd escaped multiple prisons before, which tracks as well. And then the fact that they were tied with Machine Gun Kelly, who I think financed their trip down there, and he'd done
Mickey
that
Cohen.
before. Yeah. I think they'd, you know, that had already happened with other people who had escaped from other places. And I think he was planning to do that himself before he got killed or something, or died. I'm not really sure his history, but
so Mickey Cohen, when he got out, he was actually in Alcatraz with John and Clarence, and also Frank Morris, and he bonded out for almost 7 months. And during that time frame, one of his friends, James Whitey Bulger, told him to flee to Brazil, get married, have children, and they could never, you know, bring you back, could never extradite you out. And he chose not to, but he came back to the prison, and we later find out that he financed and aided in the escape by providing a boat, financing the plane that flew them out of the country down into Mexico and then eventually into Brazil. But something that, you know, that I was very encouraged when I went down with Fred Breezy was, you know, these photos that we're looking at were taken, like I said, back in the 1970s. And this town that we went to in 2022 was such a rural town. I mean, it was, you can ask Mike, like the Monteo Lovato, which is where they originally started at, was like this really small town. I'm not even sure they had a stop sign. It had maybe like a caution line. And so you throw yourself 60 years in the past and think about what this town looked like 60 years ago. And what was Fred Breezy doing in that town? in 1969. No Americans even went there.
That's one thing, but also those towns tend to not change very much. And you guys probably experienced this. I'm pretty sure there were multiple people who were like, yeah, some American guys lived right over there.
There were.
Like what? Outside of the ego of federal agencies, I feel for you guys in not being able to get that, officially, I guess, recognized. But it's almost like, is that something you guys feel like you even need anymore? Like, I feel like, knowing that they did something that everybody said was impossible, and then seemingly enjoyed life in a small town in Brazil. Probably could have gone anywhere in the world after that. But I would love to ask you guys, because I don't think I've ever been able to ask you guys that question. So after kind of going down there, has it kind of changed your perspective on, I guess the right question is, has it changed your motivation in terms of what you guys set out to do in terms of just making sure that the truth was out there? Do you feel like that's been done, or do you think that still needs like authorities to, actually?
Well, we're not going to settle until we find their graves and we find their children, which would be my cousins. And my ultimate goal is to, one, have this case officially closed, period. And items that the FBI still has in their possession that belong to the family, all of the family letters, all of the family photos, returned. Because right now they still keep them in their possession.
Didn't they not only keep them, but didn't they emphatically say that nothing else is going to be considered after all these findings? Didn't the FBI just like lean in harder to, we're not going to cooperate and everything's kind of closed? Like, or did
I can tell you that, I have worked with 2 congressmen and 1 senator. And we've written letters to the FBI in Washington. They responded back and said, okay, this is you need to reach out to the San Francisco office because this is where the items will be kept at. And we have yet in over 4 years to ever have them respond to either one of the congressmen, either one of the senator, or myself. They won't even return our calls. And all I'm asking for is for you to return to the family what you still have in your possession. Why in the hell would you want to keep all of the letters that the family wrote to John and Clarence when they were in Alcatraz and other prisons? And why would you? What's the purpose of that? Why do you want to keep a hold of them? Why don't you just give them back to us? That's all we're asking for.
Yeah,
and to close this case.
Yeah, my theory on that is either they don't have them, or they lost them, and they don't want to make themselves look any more, foolish.
Well, I know they had them in 2012.
They have. That's the thing, is like they have them and more, I think.
Yes.
So I think that's a valid question, but I'm going to use ChatGPT real quick, but I'm pretty sure that when I was following up on this like a while ago, I'm pretty sure that the FBI's stance on Alcatraz is like no more poking and prodding. I think, and maybe
we had Art on, who was the U.S. Marshal who was handed over the case in the in the mid 2000s, and he's to this day, after we talked to him on this podcast, and Ken has talked to him offline, and he had just read Ken and Mike's book. And even to this day, after we went through the whole thing and we talked about all the individual things, and we almost felt like he was kind of leaning in our direction, kind of saying like that. And then the last thing he says, he goes, I don't think they made it.
I mean, I'm telling you, I think it's like a matter of, if they made it, then the impenetrable fortress, the Rock,
right,
its entire, it's basically erased from history in like 20 years from now. And then it's like, it's becomes about the guys who made it, basically erased it from history.
Yeah.
And like I feel like that was a big deterrent for crime and like a big success on like the use of basically jail, I guess, as a deterrent to crime, which is basically what our justice system is predicated on. But Alcatraz was especially unique in that because you literally could hear everyday life in a up and coming city happening right next to you, and so and yet it was impossible to escape. And so I honestly think that it's ego that leads to most of this. Like,
Sure.
Without a doubt. And the irony is that the conditions in Alcatraz were pretty good. So it wasn't like this. You would think. I've been to a lot of California state prisons. Okay, and I've been to Corcoran. I've been to Pelican Bay. Those are horrible places to be. It's like
horrible. Yep.
Horrible places to be. And based upon, what Ken's letters with Whitey Bulger and from some of the research it's Mike done, that, they had it pretty decent there. There weren't a lot of inmates. There was like 250 plus or minus. They each had their own cell. That never happens in prisons. And they had like programs they could do. The food apparently was really good, which is like, who says that about a prison? So it's like, if this was like this place that the government wanted to make this hellhole for the most violent and the most notorious criminals, they weren't doing it. But regardless of that fact, when John got there, within minutes, he's already planning an escape. So, but that's just who they were. They had been, we discussed this ever since they were, their childhood, and they used to escape reform schools and juvie centers and something like that. And every prison they've ever been in, they've either attempted and escaped or escaped. So it was like this for them was their chess game against the system.
And what year did they actually escape?
63.
62.
62. Okay, 62, but they got in there. What? Like in there for like a year?
So
let's see. John showed up first. He showed up in 1960, and Clarence showed up in, I think it was January of 61. So they were there about a year and a half. Yeah.
So
but I can tell you, we have letters from John where, we do have the letters that they wrote home. And John, in one of his first letters, indicated, he said, yeah, the boat ride was nice, but it was going the wrong direction.
So could it, so here's my, so given that prisons were kind of not what we see as prisons today, I think that's one factor that I've always thought about in terms of if they make the one that was impenetrable, I feel like that whole line of thinking tends to now crumble in terms of, this is an actual way to be punitive. And I think that's how they beefed up the security in prisons and whatnot. And then the other part is like, isn't it technically, wouldn't it make it like an active case, or wouldn't it, like, there's no, like, once you're a fugitive, there's no statute of limitations on that. You don't like unbecome it, right? So wouldn't they have to do work? And that's like against kind of a lot of the.
They did. There's the other ironic thing is that the fact that we were talking to Art when he was on here, is that he said they didn't make it yet, but they still checked out leads in South America, and there's documentation basically saying that they probably made it to South America. So what is it? Why are you investigating? Why? And he said, well, we didn't go down there, but we worked with Interpol, and then we found out that they went down there too. So it's just like, at this point, it's kind of like, it's not like even Art said, he goes, even if we had found them like 10 years ago, he goes, nothing really would happen to them. It's been so far long at this point. And, especially now, the case goes officially, I think, closed, I think, when they reach the age of 90.
Yeah, 99.
90 or 99. What is it?
99,
which is even more ridiculous.
More ridiculous. There's more files released prior to 2038 on the JFK assassination than there is on what a family's asking for in terms of like just memories, I guess, and communications.
So
to me, it's just like what makes it very sticky is the whole fact that Mickey Cohen got let out on probation for 6-7 months, and the person who signed his bond was the Chief Justice Warren. And we had Art basically said, "Has that ever been happened before?"
See, that's what I'm saying. I'm telling you, I don't.
And he said no.
I think this is about way more than the
Exactly.
than the brothers. I think it's about Alcatraz becoming, not something people feared, and then I think there was a lot more malfeasance probably at play because, if any movie is factually correct or any TV show, prisons back then, like you said, was basically like a break with the guys, especially if you were, and even the worse criminal you were, it seemed like the better it was, which is ironic, but odd, but it's interesting.
So I have a question for you. Technology is like increasing and advancing like every single day. The last time this photo was analyzed was by your team in 2022. Would you take the same approach today? Has the technology changed in any way that would have altered the way you did it in 2022 versus if you were doing it tomorrow?
So I actually think we did it before 2022. I think we did it in like 2017 or 2018 even. And so first answer, the first answer it would take us a lot less time. Number one, because just the computational power is just a lot better. Yeah. So 4 years ago is when the long shot came out. And then we did it probably a year before that. So probably 5 years ago. So 2019, 2018, I would say would be my guess. And so number one, yes, because just processes and things have gotten better. And then two, it would be to actually had we known there's more support and more interest in this, I think we would have petitioned for actual images from the Brazilian government because, we were able to do this anonymously. Now we can do it completely anonymously, where if you use technology like zero knowledge proofs, which is like a zero knowledge proof is like, think about it this way. If you've got two puzzles, right, and you just need to prove that there's a penguin in both of these puzzles, all you have to do is take a piece of paper, cut a little hole in it, and then an eye-sized hole, and look around. You say, all right, penguin's over here on this one, and it's down here on this one. Now I've proved that there's a penguin on both of these puzzles. So we could actually look at all of the data that they shared with us and just extract the features and do analysis on, what would have been an invasion of privacy then, and that's would have been the 100% response. We could do that anonymously now, and so that's something that I'm working on and currently is basically privacy enhancing technologies with AI, because then you don't have to give ChatGPT your entire life to get to use a large language model, or you don't have to invade a sovereign nation's basically photo database to get some sample data to run some tests that are completely innocuous. And you also don't have to go manually get people's approval. So yeah, you could definitely do this more robustly, more effectively. And then I would look at other things in the photo as well. Like back then it was just, let's look at the faces, but I would definitely look at the surroundings. I would look at the clothing. There's a lot of things that we can look for that even, even the physical photo as well. There's, ways to look at the degradation. I think that was already done though, but there's ways to basically look in the same way that they digitally enhanced and made them age from that larger data set, right? We could do that and look at the landscape and make it basically digitally digress or digitally age. And then there's just a lot more we could do. More importantly, there's probably a lot to be extracted from natural language processing, so NLP, on the letters and what they said, what they didn't say, what code they might have used in communicating with people. And that's probably a significant reason of why they're not public, is because codes are meant to be broken. And when you have GPU, when you've got a lot of GPU horsepower, graphics processing units, when you've got high performance compute, you can basically run a lot of different analysis on there, and it might say like, hey, we're going to use like in just very simple codec language that wouldn't have been caught by prison guards. Say, hey, we're going to grab onto this boat. We're going to get pulled over. Then we're heading out to Brazil. And that's really what Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA, said is, speech in human language actually tells you a lot more than image data and things of that nature. So I think that's the two real things is more data and then adding privacy, so more participation would happen. And then the other part would be to look at more than just image. Look at the communications that they even had prior to that that is public, and seeing if there's any common themes, looking at relationship graphs of more people they interacted with, kind of looking at their social network. And that's when you can start to just pile up data that might be in the 60s, 70s, or kind of percentile in terms of its like conclusiveness or accuracy. But if you add 20, 30, 40, 50 different sources of data, like, hey, they actually interacted with this person way back when, the chances of this person being in this place, like you said, is zero. So you can start to put together like a mathematically driven narrative just as compelling as any.
Well, I'd be curious. I mean, I don't know. Have you read their book yet, Mike and Ken's book?
Not the book, no.
You should read the book, because like if you do that, there's so much data in there that everything you say that these computer models can do, there's so much data there that kind of, and they make a really solid case that everything you're talking about, as far as the relationships and about the randomness of them, these two farm boys from outside of Tampa, how do they get connected with one of the the nation's most notorious gangster at the time, Mickey Cohen, on the other side of the country? And and the fact that they spent time in Mexico, and that Mickey Cohen had a farm in Mexico. He had a place in Mexico where he was growing lots of weed, and these guys were growers, and just the connection between Breezy being the connector of those two worlds, and all the other ancillary characters that come involved. And it's like when you read the book, you really see the breadcrumb trail of how this all happened. And it's just like almost the perfect storm that these were the guys that were put in Alcatraz, these escape artists from early, like young ages of like 10, 11, 12, that they're the ones that they dumped into Alcatraz. And a year and a half later, they're the ones, along with, Frank Morris, were able to escape and never to be found again. And so I think that's really fascinating. Like, just a full disclosure, I mean, we're out there, working with a couple,
Well, that's what I was going to say. We're talking to a bunch of researchers down there who they've worked on shows like Find Your Roots, like these kinds of people. And we've come across several photos that we would love for you to look at at some point, and traced like relatives. Like, there's a photo that I thought was Ken. I thought it was Ken. I was like, Ken, what? I go, why? I said to the researcher, I go, why are you sending me a picture of Ken? He's like, it's not Ken.
So that's actually analysis that can be done, and that is relevant. There's obviously we look like people that we're related to. So what's interesting though is that here's my question to you guys is having actual ones and zeros actually prove what common sense and then some elbow grease and connecting the dots does that make a difference to people, like, or like this, because Mike and Ken, what you guys have done is you did what I just described is you took all the variables and including the ones that aren't there, right? So like if this isn't there, this makes it strange, right? The absence, the negative space, but just like the incredibly random stuff that isn't conspiracy related, that's just like this human being was in this very specific place on the planet Earth and had no actual reason for being there, then came back and told somebody about it. And then, all these things just like, is that going to, I'm wondering, is any analysis really going to change what? I
think so. Cause I think what you get is, cause you have Ken, who's the nephew, who people could say, well, he's biased for this story to become true. he wants the story to become true. So it eliminates that. If on top of all the physical evidence and the research they've done for this book, the fact that if you can take all of that information that we get, and possibly maybe even more that we discover, because we're discovering more in the Brazil area each day, and put that into a computer model where it kind of, I think, and get that same kind of percentile that you got with the facial recognition, that all this stuff matches up based upon all the data that's been into it. I think it then, because who knows if the government's ever going to come out of their closet and say like that. You don't know. I mean, Art's retired now, and he's still holding on to this.
They'll never. I'll try to find the source to it and send you guys an email. But like, I was watching something that made me think of Ken and Mike. I was like, it was something about how the FBI, once they close the chapter on something, it's just not going to get out unopened. But I would argue that, maybe this is just me, but I would argue that the fact that it's not closed actually would benefit. If someone was trying to profiteer off of something, I think we have a lot of evidence that conspiracies are more profitable than truth and facts. And in this case, it's pretty clear from the start that Mike and Ken have wanted just family things back, and like basic recognition as humans and decency as humans, right? And for their relatives as well, who presumably were human as well, I'm assuming. But, they're not asking for, there's no public humiliation being asked for. There's no, if the motive was, if Ken was like seeking a reality TV show, then maybe. But for me, it's just like, there's only we could put a lot more science behind it, but I would argue that the science that's been put into it is just as I see what you're saying. It's about casting dispersion, casting doubts, this is how you could bring that to a resolution. But until I feel like the same doubt would be cast until you got somebody from the actual government.
Well, I think there's probably someone out there that would be willing to talk if you come up with all this initial data, even despite their company line on, when their government employee, probably a retired person, because it happens all the time. People come out. But the main reason there are conspiracy theories about this is because they did withhold information, and they are withholding information. And that's how these things happen. When there's not transparency, people will look at what they do have and say, well, they have all this information. They have A, B, C, D, and E, and F, and they're missing the rest of the alphabet. But we know the alphabet exists. The rest of the alphabet exists. So why can't we see the rest of the alphabet?
I bet if you offered them 10 years worth of what Alcatraz brings in tourism, they'd give you whatever you wanted.
It's like,
that would be my bet, because the implications of this means that kind of goes away probably. Yeah. I bet you give them 10 years worth up front now, they'll give you whatever you need.
I mean, because it's like it's the craziest story that, as far as prison escapes, it's probably the greatest prison escape in history, next to that, the one that happened in World War II that they made a movie about.
Gotta be the greatest escape.
It's, and the fact that they made it, and they have proof that they made it, and they lived a life, and the circumstances around it, and Ken's family. I mean, who else could really kind of reveal this information other than a family member?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So here, this is what you're up against. You're up against 1.4 to 1.6 million visitors annually. It's one of the top destinations in the United States globally. Ticket sales are $41 to $50 for adults, so we can do the math, $67 million a year. And then additional revenue streams, probably $200 to $300 million a year. So
okay,
you've got a whole lot of motivation to keep this as a conspiracy and keep this shrouded in mystery. And then you've got almost zero motivation, especially if just, a justice signed, a pretty violent criminal's release and, on bond. And then this guy's tied to an escape. And then, that escape. He's
also tied to a lot of other things that was going on to the government as well.
But like, what people don't realize is that escape was not like a small thing. It was like, it was part of a culmination of things that some pretty notorious criminals were doing all over the country at that time. I mean, I just try to think in practicality, and you're talking about removing.
I think it would probably, like you said before, I mean, if you get all this information, you can prove it and stuff like that, and definitively prove it, like even more so than what Ken and Mike have done and what you've done as far as all this information. I think people would want to go to Alcatraz even more.
I don't disagree with you. It's just when you're dealing with the government is they move slow and like you said, they toe the company line, and $250 million in revenue to a municipality is a heck of a lot of money, or actually national park, so federal. But I think that could be something that probably is an interesting. I don't think a lot of people probably like to talk about that side of it, but I would say that that's something where they're profiteering off of the fact that they're not going to give an answer more than they would have if they did. And that's what's really unfortunate about this. And, the cool part about it is if they did, it would be really interesting to see how much more we could learn about the kind of evolution of Alcatraz, its actual efficacy, not just kind of the stories they tell us about it. Right. And I feel like this is the one event that actually sheds light into how much you could access and how much some people did access, but it also shows kind of, the evolution of, kind of the justice system. Because I do think this was one of the series of events that created a huge crackdown and much stiffer prison sentences, much more higher security. I mean, you can't point, correlation doesn't equal causation doesn't equal correlation, but I do think I was reading somewhere that it does do that. I don't know, Mike or Ken, if you guys ever came upon that in your research, but, I would imagine that this was something that someone grandstanded about and created some reform that might not be looked at so favorably today.
Well, I think in our research, we definitely thought we had uncovered and believe we had uncovered that, this actually could be larger than just Alcatraz. And there's so many different players when you really start looking at the detail and the evidence that we uncovered. It's not just about John Clarence and
was it Al Capone involved in
no, but when you get into like Whitey Bulger and you get into Mickey Cohen,
Whitey Bulger,
and then you get into like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Who in the world has ever heard of a Supreme Court justice signing a bond for a gangster to get out of prison? I mean, that ain't even happen. And then so this particular individual, oh my gosh, he's Warren. Where's people heard Earl Warren at before? Oh, he was later picked by President Johnson to head up the Kennedy assassination. Right, so he's the one who ran that. Well, but then it
was CIA. That could.
Wait a minute. So like Mickey Cohen's best friend, who is Ruby, Jack Ruby. Oh, he's the one who shot Oswald.
He's the.
So you keep going down this rabbit hole, and we're like freaking out, going, "Gosh, how is this all tied to Alcatraz?"
Well, I mean, have you ever thought of your uncles being actually part of the government and not fugitives from the government? And that's
I have my own theory about what I believe happened. Okay, one of the characters in this scenario is a lady by the name of Candy Barr, who is a stripper, who was actually a girlfriend of Mickey Cohen's, and also worked or was very good friends with Jack Ruby. She testified 2 days, maybe 2-3 days before the actual shooting. Jack Ruby came by her house to drop off a puppy. He was giving her a dog. They knew each other very well. There was another individual in the car. They had just come back from Mexico. There was another individual in the car. She went out and offered him a glass of water. She testified to it. And the guy, said he didn't want anything. 2 days later, after the shooting, she recognized that was Oswald in the car with Jack Ruby. They had just come back from Mexico.
Mexico City.
My theory is if they had traveled down to the same farm that John, Clarence, and Frank Morris was hiding out at, because they hadn't left the farm yet to go down to Brazil. If they had traveled down there, don't you think that John and Clarence and Frank Morris could have said, if they were ever found, yeah, Jack Ruby and Oswald came to where we were at. Like
that
explains a lot. Stuff,
that explains why they would want to keep a lid on this.
That would explain why they don't want to find out.
Well, it's also could explain why they disappeared or couldn't talk about it. Is maybe they, I mean, there's a million conspiracies about the Kennedy stuff, but for me, it never ends with a single shooter and a book repository building.
Exactly.
But
right.
Ends up with the Shmiia, rhymes with that. And that's where I think having the organized crime ties were just, there's no one who's denying that anymore, but that's where the Warren aspect becomes really interesting. I didn't know that, Ken. That's actually something I'd love. I guess I got to read the book, man. I don't know if that's in the book.
You got to read the book.
It is.
I'll have to check that out. That's a thread. That's a rabbit hole I'm definitely going to be going down because.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It's not just that too. When you find out when they started digging into the fact that the third brother, who was in another federal prison on the other side of the country, was put through the MK Ultra program.
Oh.
And that who else was on the MK Ultra was Whitey Bulger. And Charles Manson. There was plenty of So it's like there's all these things. My question to you is, with the way technology is and what you do, is there a way, and I'm sure there's going to be a way, if there's not a way right now, that you can put all this data in from all of this and it'll come up with some sort of explanation based upon all these data points that we know about, that are bona fide?
Yeah, so looking at it, basically, the first thing that I would want to do is create basically from conversations like this, it's actually, and like written text, we could put it in, and that's basically, I don't know if you guys know so before GPT was basically the largest data set of mankind. It was mostly media, research, paid, publications, basically everything you could cram together to be kind of like our Library of Alexandria. And it was, you had to apply to use it and all this stuff. And then, Microsoft paid a company like $30 billion to monetize it, which is crazy. But, the large language model concept is where you could input all of this data and basically make it a DIY due diligence tool where you could actually look at the relationship graphs. You could say, explain to me how, this person's related to that person and everything in between. So you would want to look at like the social network, the actual communications between that substantiate those relationships. You'd want to be able to bring in things that happen concurrently. So like the Kennedy assassination, like Jack Ruby, any other people that were involved with the farm that may have been, and basically as much data as you can with anybody that's involved with the places of interest, the people of interest. And then you basically look at as much of that as that's written down. And back then it would be literally written. So you would use optical character recognition, which is just taking written text and converting it and digitizing it. So yeah, you could definitely input all of this, and it would be something where you would want to create something that's more of a resource. It would be like an encyclopedia on that arm of organized crime at that time, along with anybody who interacted with Alcatraz, or like you'd pick a few keystones to build this around, and then you would want to pour as much data around those. So you'd have Mickey Cohen, you'd have the Anglin brothers, you'd have Alcatraz. But really, you'd have those as fixtures to put as much data around, and then use the ability to have conversational AI kind of look at this as a large language model where you can introduce new data to interact with it, and it's going to search its knowledge base and give you back like an intelligent answer that's, filling in a lot of gaps that you would not be able to associate yourself. And then honestly, I think the thing that's most compelling to me is people respond to like visualization, right? So like having a data visualization that shows just a timeline of who is involved, the actual geographic locations, and just imagining like just, that data going over time, like how many Americans were actually in this place total at that time, and showing that over from then onwards, and that number probably going from like 10 to 10,000 or more in probably every location except for the small town in Brazil. And then looking at like just basically creating something that people would actually be able to interact with would be very possible. It's just I don't know how much of that is public, and I don't know how much of it is I wouldn't know. I mean, Ken and Mike would probably need to. I mean, that's why they call it a neural network, because it's taking how you're approaching the problem solving, and you're looking at this, and then you just fine tune the parameters. So it's definitely very possible. I think it would be very cool. It's definitely not out of reach at all in terms of the tech today. But I mean, I think it would be about understanding the larger picture and then inputting kind of what are the fixtures that have enough data around them to then be able to start to fill in the blanks, to then be able to draw real conclusions from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how I would look at it today. And like, that's why I'm really a proponent of just basically, the issue with that is privacy, and like everybody wants it. Nobody actually has it. And then it's a big excuse to not share things. And so that's why I think, the biggest step for moving forward in these kinds of circumstances is introducing things that don't require the full picture to get the answer you need.
Yeah.
So I got a real quick question, and I know you're going over a little bit, but so you talked about being able to digitize and use, the photos and the surrounding area around the photo, like the farm, because we kind of know where that's at, actually very close. Could you do that with their signature? Could you take their signature and then like somehow digitize it and then take it and compare it against signatures and government documents in Brazil?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, that's so actually that's
actually like a fingerprint, right?
Well, that's actually what I was about to say. So we started by doing video fingerprinting before there was before we could use neural networks, and like it was just like straight up statistical analysis. We used fingerprints. So we'd create, so imagine like a commercial, right? A 15-second commercial, that's its fingerprint. When it airs, these features are looked at. It confirms that this is what aired, automates that. So you can, I mean, the most I think people don't realize this is like more than an actual fingerprint. Your voice is actually more unique.
So I'm gonna throw something out at you, and this will take Brazil completely out of the picture here. So I do know that Fred Breezy talked about that their farm was a huge farm, and they purchased a lot of John Deere tractors. Okay, so he was talking about how many of them they had. There was a John Deere dealership just in that same town where the GM or the Chevrolet plant was. So if they went down and they purchased a farm equipment, they had to sign something, right? Even if they paid cash for it, you're signing something. Is it possible for us to get this kind of information from John Deere and then take their signatures? Could you match something, even if they didn't write their name and they didn't say John Anglin? Could you pick up similarities based upon how they're writing their name?
Well, so I think the way to do it would be just looking at that time period, that dealership. I think getting John Deere to agree would be the hardest part. That's why I think the privacy enhancing part makes that. But if what we would do is just look at all signatures and all handwriting, and then see which ones actually align in terms of patterns. And then from the pattern analysis, then we could look at, that's when it would sift through the data to be like, all right, these are the ones that match. Now it's about looking at whether they match forensically. And that's probably where you want like a handwriting expert rather than anything computational. But that's how you could take big data or data that's being obfuscated by changed names or whatever. So they don't have any, right now they wouldn't have any reason to tell you that. But if you could say, hey, look at this pattern of all of these, names and dates and times, and tell me there's no reason to act. It's like how people issue a search warrant, right? You need probable cause. I would say establishing that probable cause could easily be done by analyzing the actual, handwriting and kind of penmanship, not the actual data itself, not the actual signature, not the actual what's written. And then from there, I think it would probably be better to get like an actual forensic handwriting person. But yeah, I think that's actually a very interesting way to look at it. I mean, that would definitely confirm it. And then, there's the whole concept of if they were using U.S. currency, I'm pretty sure that's something that, John Deere has to account for, which then, these things have serial numbers on them, and
and that brings up the point of they more than likely were financed by Mickey Cohen. He financed their whole thing, so I'm sure he was dealing in American cash.
Yeah,
sure. American cash back then, as for most of the time, still is king. So it's like you can use it anywhere. So
like John Deere would have to classify foreign exchange, like they would have to classify receiving U.S. dollars in a place that isn't the U.S. And just like any company at the time. I don't know if they're public at the time, but if they're public, then they definitely would have had to disclose that. And that's something where that should be public record. I mean, John Deere might be willing to play ball. I mean, does the place still exist there?
I believe that there are still John Deere dealerships there, but the corporate here, which is based in the U.S., right, should have everything from all of their dealerships throughout the world. I mean, anytime you purchase something in, let's say you purchase something in California, but the corporate is over in, Atlanta, Georgia, they have a copy of that record.
So the challenge would be the digitization. Are these things digitized, or did they just kind of lose the record? Is there a storm?
Yeah, I mean, because if they're paying cash for something and they maybe just say, listen, we're going to buy these tractors for cash. We don't want a record about it.
Right. But there is a way to.
It's not even just that. It's just the time period, right? So, it's like John Deere probably, like I said, I mean, might have been a storm where all of these things were lost, but
that's what they do in these countries. Like when I was in Sicily looking for records, there was a fire. They're all gone. I don't know. Yeah, same thing. But our researcher, he was able to find a passport photo with a signature on it that potentially could be either Clarence or John under a pseudonym or a different name.
Does it have a photo in it?
Yeah, it has a photo. So we'd love for you to take a,
I would love to see that. And I'll try to dig up the data. I mean, I've been I think I've been a Dropbox user since day one. I have like 160 terabytes of usage, which is my link to people. It's more data. I think it's more storage than anyone ever has on the planet. But I think we have like 19 terabytes of video and like footage. I'll look through it, and I'll talk to Mark, our chief scientist, and see what we can dig up, and then basically, I mean, if there's other stuff to look at, I mean, there's a lot of.
I think there's definitely stuff to look at, and we're going to talk to you offline about this because we have some things in motion here that we just don't want to reveal on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but listen, this has been fascinating. The work you do is fascinating.
So interesting.
It's like my head is spinning right now, and I got to kind of go back and digest what you've been talking about because, like, I'd have a question and then you kind of go into this other direction. I'm like, oh shit, and all this shit. So I got to
questions.
got to process this with Mike and Ken and kind of figure out a game plan. But thank you for being on. We're probably going to have you on again to kind of do some of this stuff. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you. My information is in the chat. If you guys want to call me, I'm old school. So shoot me a text, call me, and I'd love to distill anything that I might have ranted on down, but I really thank you for having me. It was unbelievable just to see this continue to unfold and all the tentacles. Ken, Mike, always a pleasure, and always excited to
always good. Nice
excited to learn more about the book, guys. I didn't know that. It's awesome.
Great.
Definitely need to read it. It's something.
Yeah, we'll get you the book.